اهلا وسهلا. انا محمد تهامي، مؤسس شركه باشن بوينت، واحده من الشركات الرائده في مجال تطوير رياده الاعمال في مصر. والنهارده حلقه جديده من ذا ليج اوف بزنس ليجندز، فيها معايا ضيف خاص جدا ومهم جدا، هو امير حجازي. امير is a global entrepreneur وبست سيلينج اوثر لكتابين في منتهى الاهميه، واحد اسمه ستارت اب ارابيا، وكتابه الاخير اسمه ايكو سيستم ارابيا. وهو كمان كان دايركتور اوف ماركت بليس في سوق دوت كوم اللي هي اكوايرد باي امازون زي ما انتم عارفين. النهارده امير هو كو فاوندر ومانجنج بارتنر في شركه اسمها مينا. هو متخصصين في تقديم الاستشارات للمشاريع اللي عاوزه تكسباند في الاميرجنج ماركتس، وبالاخص في المينا ريجن. فخليني ارحب بامير. امير, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and I hope thanks everyone for your time, and I hope everyone is safe and well.
Thank you. Amir, let's start by your backstory. Can you give us a background about yourself, your career, and how did you start your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, coming out of, I guess I would back forward a little bit to out of college. Just a little bit background actually before that. So I'm born in Egypt in Alexandria. So بتكلم عربي كل حاجة، بس يمكن في البزنس الإنجليزي أسهل لي. So let's keep it in English. But basically, I was born in Alex. I grew up in, I moved to US in LA when I was 13 and went to college and so forth. After college, I was very interested in business. And I didn't know what business to pursue other than my own passion. At the time, I grew up playing sports and athletic and fitness. So I decided to just get my feet wet with the fitness business. And I started learning about business kind of through just exposure to books and videos. And Michael Gerber, we talked about earlier, was a huge impact on me, the E-Myth kind of way of thinking. And it was amazing how much I learned through just grassroots level and my own exposure and my own kind of putting myself in a different world that outside of my own fitness business, that I didn't really know how it will eventually pay off or what I would learn, but I was very interested in it and I dived into it. So the first phase was learning, right? Exposure. And I would go to conferences, tech conferences, and I met Michael Dell, and I would put myself in situations that have nothing to do with my business, but I felt like someday it may give me a way out because as much as I was passionate about fitness, it's a service business, it's very tough to scale, and I actually did very well. We grew the business to about 2,000 clients, but I felt that it wasn't challenging me intellectually. I was more interested in, the internet was happening, so I was really more into that, and I wanted to find a transition into that kind of industry. And that's kind of to your point earlier about how do you make that transition? So I think it started before, just by exposure, right? So phase one, expose yourself to a lot of things, to a lot of people, way ahead before you have that kind of killer idea, right? So the first is you got to feed your mind and expose yourself till something clicks and you say, wow, there's an opportunity, or there's something I can do, or I'm interested in this topic. So I would say that the first kind of real start, and this is kind of a quick funny story, is a friend of mine was starting an online video, or actually online TV network. This is back in 2004, right? So back then, video was a novel concept, right? Nobody was doing video. There was no YouTube, Amazon, no Netflix, definitely. And I got the idea. I was like, wow, of course, video is the future, and TV online is like a given. So he said, you can come for an interview. He was an investor in this company, and I was living in LA. I jumped in a plane the next day, went for an interview. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about online video, TV world, right? And I studied for a day, full day, went by a tie and a suit, jumped on a plane, and went to New York to meet the COO. And I had a full presentation. And, they were looking for someone to be the head of the Middle East, right? And I've been removed from the Middle East, so I don't even know the media world in the Middle East at all. And I met them, and they said, okay, you sound like potential. However, tomorrow is the biggest trade show in the world called MIB-TV in France. And all the management team is there. So, you have to wait till we come back. So I took a plane to France I'm not even being hired, right? And I went to France to prove myself. I figured, either I got the job and I need to be in this world, or I need to go there to show what I can do. And I went, so imagine this massive trade show, probably the biggest in the world. Actually, it is the biggest in the world in terms of content and TV and so forth. And I go there with no previous knowledge and looking around, looking for people who look Middle Eastern, right? So that's kind of my flag. Oh, someone looks Middle Eastern, I definitely can figure that out. And I go talk to them. And that business eventually, which ran as an entrepreneur because they had it set up as a different division where you completely manage the business, was really in my transition into that world, right? So it was a leading digital media. We ended up signing all the top TV channels in the world, all the content players in the world. In the Middle East, I was running the Middle East, and we had about 70 TV channels. So everyone from Al Jazeera, Dubai, NBC, you name it, we had exclusive right for online TV. And that was the beginning of a big journey that shifted my career. So sometimes, you seed something way ahead of time. And when the time comes, you make that quick jump. You see the opportunity and you go for it. But it happened because I had that previous learning, watching, exposing, right? So those are the seeds that you plant ahead. And when the time comes, these things come handy. And when I took that job in this role, I was just really surprised how much I already kind of instinctively knew from my background of learning. It came more natural. There wasn't as much of a learning curve. So I mean, that ties into a lot of things that we talked about the subject, but that was the beginning, and it set me up on a whole nother journey, if you will.
This is very insightful because the seeding and the exposure concept is extremely important. And I see a lot of employees are very conservative about that because they believe or they think that seeding or exposing themselves into the entrepreneurship world is somehow seductive and may force them or may seduce them to take risky actions and their jobs immaturely or before at the wrong time, because entrepreneurship has its own magic. So they somehow they are afraid of doing that, and they think that unless they have the right idea or have this inspiration that comes to them at the right time, then they will not move a step forward. So, but yes, it should happen the way you explained, and you have to start seeding before you do the leap. So I absolutely agree with what you said. So your first book, Startup Arabia, what inspired you to write it? And your other book that's just published is Ecosystem Arabia. How these two books tie together? Because I believe they are sort of a series, or they are linked together in a way or another. So tell us more about these two books.
Yeah, so you're right, they are linked. In fact, I think of them as almost like Ecosystem Arabia is a sequel to Startup Arabia, because they're two sides of the same coin. So it started back in, I think, the beginning of this was really at Souk. So when we were at Souk, we were all driven by, internally, we call it make history, right? So we felt that, if we can make this company successful, whether it becomes a multi-billion dollar business, or exits, or, goes on the NASDAQ in the US and become a world-class company, it's going to set the bar higher in the region. It's going to break a lot of the kind of mental limits that, successful companies come from abroad, right? We took pride into something that this is local, we can do it. And I think the exit proved that. So that's something that I felt kind of proud of. When it happened, I was almost like instantly compelled to write that story that we lived, right? To share it with all its ups and downs and the challenges and so forth. I felt it will help serve a lot of the younger generation, and I know a lot of them. They're making career choices coming out of colleges, and I feel that local education / inspiration was missing, right? So there's not enough focus on local stories, success stories in different fields. Those stories don't really come out as much. They come out in bits and pieces, of course, but I felt the spotlight wasn't big enough. And that's kind of what the idea was behind Startup Arabia. So I'll show you for those who haven't seen it, just so you can visualize it. So this is the book, right? And it's available on startuparabiabook.com for free. You can just get the free download. So it featured 22 top tech advisors in the region, top tech entrepreneurs in the region, in different fields, from different countries, in different industries, with different backgrounds. Upon finishing that book, I realized, as also through work that I've done with the Ministry of Commerce and Investments, I'm an advisor on the E-commerce Council Committee, so been exposed to the kind of the government side and their initiatives around the new economy and boosting e-commerce and the digital kind of industry in general, as well as working with their national companies that are eyeing doing business in the region, and also see the region as kind of like somewhat of a black box, and they have, it's not so, they don't see the full story, right? They're only kind of exposed to a part of the story, which is what they see in the media and so forth. So that's kind of triggered Ecosystem Arabia. And as I started working on Ecosystem Arabia to kind of present a more holistic view of the landscape, I quickly realized that, I'm not the authority. There's no single authority. The only way this could work is if you bring the best minds, the best, most impactful practitioners in different areas and present their point of view, because it's a complex thing, right? So I ended up with 120 experts and people and ecosystem builders in the region and global experts as well, right? So, and I interviewed them. I went, gung-ho for 6 months, which was a very, very fast pace for a book. And it came out really nice. So here's Ecosystem Arabia, if you haven't seen it. So it's on Amazon. It's quite a big book, but it's not meant to be read in a single setting, and these are some of obviously the experts and the practitioners. So in entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, incubators, thought leaders, right? So it's pretty comprehensive, and it covers education, funding, attracting international companies. It covers culture. I mean, it's quite holistic and comprehensive. So that's where I am. It was released last week, so it's still in the very beginning.
Wow! It's a classic one, a timeless book, I believe.
Well, I hope it can be impactful in the present time, and I think it's more timely than ever, given some of the challenges. Yeah.
Yes, and based on your massive experience in the field and interviewing other experts and influencers in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, what are the main pain points that you see entrepreneurs are facing nowadays?
Yeah, so obviously it varies from country to country in the region, but some of the themes run across the board in some way, in some form or another. So, and it depends also on the stage of development of the business. But at the very beginning, things like setting up and licensing are challenging. In some countries, you have to actually, there's a complex setup process. You have to get an office. You have to pay upfront for rent for a year. So you're putting out a lot of cash well before the business is up and running, which becomes much more difficult than in other places like US, where you can get set up in Delaware and be up and running quickly. Also in the US, in terms of taxes, you're paying taxes on profit, not on revenues. And startups, by definition, or by, traditionally, don't make profit or for some time. So that's a huge burden upfront as well. So these things become obstacles and can hurt you really in your scale, right? Then it limits you in how far you can go from the speed you can build quickly up and running. And then things like visas, right? Recruiting internationally, which becomes a big issue in innovative fields where there's not enough local talent in technical senior level positions. If you're doing something innovative and trying to find someone who's been doing it for 5 or 10 years, it's going to be almost impossible to find enough local talent. So then how do you get them from abroad, and how fast that happens, and the approval process and so forth. Things like customs for e-commerce is still a challenge, getting goods in and out of countries. It becomes even easier sometimes to get products from the US than it is from next door country. So these are outdated regulations that just haven't been able to keep up with the very fast, changing world. On the funding side, we see a gap after Series C, basically Series C onwards, where, it might be relatively easier to get the first, $500,000, $10 million. And then at some point at 20, 30, 50, 40, then it's a huge drop, right? There's not enough local investors and you have to go outside. And it increasingly gets even more so as you go higher. And I think that's one of the theories behind why Souk and Kareem sold, is not, of course, being adopted by a world-class company that can help take it to the next level, but also because the options were more limited. At that level, you need a bigger investment. You need to do, $500 million funding, and there's nobody in the region that's going to do that, right? So it becomes very difficult. You need deep pockets. So these are some of the challenges. Obviously, there are some embedded cultural challenges you alluded to earlier, just about the mindset, which are really key, because you can have all the support in the world, but if people are not thinking about things in a proactive way and kind of, in the right productive way, all the support in the world is not going to happen. And you have to have the follow through and the work ethic and that. So that culture, which is kind of links to education, also is, while it's getting better, there are gaps, and it's not, it's not happening uniformly across the board. It's maybe happening more so in the big cities and in certain countries and others. So there's still some lag around that. So these are some of the challenges. One big challenge which happened as these startups scale, they hit a ceiling, right? Because the region by and large is comprised of small countries, right? With the exception of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, you have small countries. So at some point, you need to go to the next market, but then you have to reset up, you have to hire, get legal support, you have to get a new office, and it becomes a lot more complex project to set up again and again, versus Europe or US, where it's a homogenous market that's open. And if you set up in one state or one country, one state in the US or one country in Europe, you have that whole market, 400 million people that you can address. So it's kind of, it's kind of unfortunate, because the Middle East is actually by culture and by language is more kind of ripe for full expansion, but yet those hurdles get in the way. Whereas in Europe, you have so many different countries, so many different languages, cultures, yet it's a lot more fluid in terms of expansion. So that's a huge issue that faces every company as they kind of hit that ceiling. And to the extent that we can make those markets open and there's a single incorporation between the countries, maybe starting with a few countries in the beginning, the big ones, and then make it across the board, that will be that will make a massive difference in how big these companies can eventually get. Yeah. And how fast they can get.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge bunch of challenges.
There's a lot of positive things too, so I don't want to make it sound all bleak. Yeah.
Wow. You mentioned in what you said earlier, the innovation part, and surprisingly, we see a lot of innovative ideas that go full scale, and some other innovative ideas may be even better than other ones, but they failed. So based on your analysis so far, what's the reason for failure? Why some innovative ideas work and others don't? Is it about the entrepreneur, about the ecosystem, about the technical part, or?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it's about the entrepreneur and the founding team. Obviously, to the extent that the ecosystem is missing certain certain areas that will help support those startups, it's going to be a little bit more difficult if there are hurdles. But a good company, a good entrepreneur, a good founding team finds ways around those hurdles and becomes, that's a startup by definition is your problem solving, right? Whether it's internal problems or external with your market or even around policies and so forth. So ultimately it's about the entrepreneurs and about the team. And what I've seen there are kind of three areas where obviously there's a ton of mistakes that can happen that could eventually hurt the business, but there's common themes. And if you keep in mind what they are, then you're much more likely to succeed. So I break them into three categories. So I break it into strategic mistakes, execution mistakes, and then kind of like personal. So I'll talk about those as well. So strategic. So often, as an entrepreneur, you get excited about your business and you're talking to different people, you're exposing yourself to different publications or thinking, and you're seeing what similar business have done elsewhere, and you're getting a lot of ideas. So then you end up with kind of a big, grand vision of where the business needs to be. And the mistake here is when you let your big goal determine your current focus and current reality and become, in effect, unfocused, right? Because you're trying too many things. Instead of saying, okay, this is what I need, this is the most important thing, and have milestones, you're running your team into too many different directions. There's a funny kind of analogy. They say boiling the ocean, right? So you're trying, it's impossible, right? So you're instead of having this kind of focused kind of approach, you're kind of spread out. So that happens a lot. Another one is kind of almost being too overly optimistic, right? And not planning for things not happening as planned. You're expecting the product to be on this date. You're sure it's going to be on this date, but guess what? Last minute you found out that there's something not working, and it's going to delay things, and it's going to cost more money, or someone from your team quitting. So you almost have to plan for the worst case scenario and push for the best case scenario, right? So overly optimistic can also hurt the business. The other thing I see, and this is kind of, is almost like believing in your own hype, right? So you get up and running, you raise some funds, the media is coming to you, and you kind of almost think you made it, but all you did was get the funding, right? And often you haven't even proven the business really as a sustainable business, so you got a long way. So that's just the beginning. So that kind of hype makes you think you've made it, and it can hurt how you plan ahead and so forth. So those on the strategic side. I think also an entrepreneur needs to be open to feedback and have advisors, because really there's no expert. No matter how good you are, how much you know your industry, there's some it's complex business. So you need to know marketing, you need to know finance, and if you don't know it, you better be able to know how to get it through resources and advisors and so forth. And if you're not able to build that support network and count on people that will give you the right advice and know how to keep them supportive, it can definitely hurt you, because there's always going to be a blind spot that you miss, and that could hurt you down the road. So those are on the strategy side. On the execution side, I say sometimes there's kind of like paralysis by analysis, where you're trying to build a spaceship, and instead it's too complex, you don't take action, and time is running out and funds are running out, and you haven't really got to the basic nuts and grits and if this business is going to work. Often they spend too much time on perfecting a product and not testing the product assumptions. I give an example of Instabug out of Egypt, for example. So before they even launched the product, all they did was put a video demonstrating how the product would work, and see the response of people of that community they launched it in, and that was a validation that people wanted this product and it would work this way. And even within those feedback, they learn what things that people might want before they even kind of develop the product, versus the other way around, go build it, spend money, spend time, and then find out that you were off track. So these kind of risk management practices to validate your assumptions, to keep the cost down, to keep you focused on what really matters for the customer, and listening to feedback is really critical. And then finally, personal kind of challenges is that as an entrepreneur, it's a it's a lifestyle, right? It's not something you would do 9 to 5 and forget about it. It's kind of almost you have to keep thinking about it. It's time consuming and so forth. So unless you have that support network and be able to manage your health and kind of well-being, you can burn out, right? It gets overwhelming because you're the center point and everybody's coming to you. And, you may start with, 5 problems you're committing to solving, and then you find out there's another 10, right? So you have to have that basic support system. And it becomes difficult if you have a family and so forth, because now you're less available time-wise. And that's where the focus needs to be on quality, right? Because I cannot spend as much time, but when I do spend time, I'm going to be there focused, and I'm going to make it, make my family feel valued and so forth. So I think some of these are just being organized and kind of being realistic and still making, setting those targets and learning in the process, really. So that's really the most common pitfalls, I would say.
Yeah. So lastly, let's give an advice to an employee, because we focus mainly on, in Passion Point, on unfulfilled employees who want to make a safe transition to entrepreneurship. So of course, an employee has a different set of challenges when it comes to starting a business. So do you have a specific model for that? How to make that transition as safe as possible, like a step-by-step process?
Yeah, I think the key is to break it into milestones and not see it as a one move, but a series of steps, right? So it's like 6 steps or 10 steps to get from A to G rather than A to B, right? It's not a one jump. It's not quit. It's not on one extreme. You don't want to just quit cold turkey and have no plan and have no, you don't have a business really. That's setting you up for failure. And on the other hand, you don't want to make the process too lengthy and too complicated and too, risky in your mind that you never make that kind of transition. So the way you do it is you break it up. And we talked earlier about, the seeding stage. The first thing, if you don't have a basic concept or an idea for a business, is you just expose yourself to different areas of interest that you're in. And you set that as a goal. So, for the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever, I'm going to learn about this industry. I'm going to expose myself to different things and let it come to you, right? It's not something you can force it really. So all you can do is just expose yourself to a lot of different people, conferences, videos, books, you name it, right? And just kind of keep feeding your interest and see what areas that lead you to be more curious about. Which areas are you find interesting and you're finding there's something here that it's worthwhile my time, not just as an opportunity, but more also as this can be impactful, right? There's a need here. There's nobody who's stepping in to make this happen. And there's a market that wants this or is in need of this. There's a real problem that need to be solved. So give yourself that time, the initial seeding. I call it the pre-idea phase. And then you have the idea phase. Okay, now I have an idea, a hunch. Now let me develop it more. Let me pursue it more and make it into a plan, right? So all this is happening while you still have your job. So it becomes a matter of really being disciplined enough where you have time set aside. I'm going to work on this for 3 hours every night or in the weekend. I'm going to block a whole day every weekend to work on this and almost treat it like it's another job, right? If you don't have that discipline, it's easy at that point for the idea or the dream to kind of fade away, right? And I would even say that it's more important that you're consistent with it than how much time you put into it. So even if it's like, okay, I'm going to do it every day. I don't even care if it's 15 minutes a day, but every day religiously, 15 minutes is my minimum to keep your brain thinking, to keep that kind of flame going, because it can die very easily. Because a lot of this is inspiration, right? So if you keep it on your mind, you keep that motivation going to kind of keep you interested to go further. So those are the first stages preceding idea, and then you have the plan, right? So the plan, this is where you're going to commit it. You're going to start putting the pieces in writing, and it forces you to articulate what you're thinking and validate your assumption and present something logical and talk to people who can give you more feedback to fill in the gaps in the plan. It doesn't have to be comprehensive in terms of a lengthy plan, but it has to hit the key points, right, of what it makes it to be, what makes a business. And I think a good example of for someone is to just Google a pitch deck, right? Try to find a pitch deck and see the structure, which is what investors look at, and try to fill in as much as possible into that. Once you have that, the business the concept takes on a life of its own, because now you can circulate it to people and say, can I get your feedback? Which you wouldn't have been able to do if the idea was just in your mind, right? So it puts you in another level where you can really start testing or validating the assumptions. So all this is happening well before you even make any step, right? There's a little kind of tool I would highly recommend is someone to have a notebook. It's very simple, but literally have a notebook, and that you can write in. It's something on your mind. You think of an idea, you write it. It keeps you thinking and active, and you don't lose kind of the thoughts, and then refer back to it and organize your thoughts. So this happens way before. And then once you have that kind of, concept, it's a lot easier to engage people, to see if you can get help. Someone who's interested also, who wants to make a transition to a new business, you can find the co-founder. You guys going to work on it on the side and the weekend. So many businesses started this way with friends or people of common interest, because they were sold on the kind of the business concept. So I mean, these are the kind of the basic steps. It's obviously not a night and day and night transition. It's something that takes time. So I think you have to kind of break it up and kind of just focus on that stage. Obviously, if you have something that's already, you come from an industry where you already have the experience, it's a lot different, right? Because you've done some of that seeding already. You don't have to kind of research something. You've already been doing it for 10 years and you found there's nobody's doing this and I'm going to go in. And you have obviously the credibility and the experience to leverage, to get funding. You just need to kind of, again, do that pitch deck, get the team, get people to support you. If and when the funding will come, I'm going to join your team and have that to present to investors to sell a story, basically. So it depends where you are. But again, the point I emphasize is just make it a process with milestones rather than think of it as cold turkey. I have to quit and so forth.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So let's leave our audience with your number one advice for entrepreneurial success.
I mean, I would say it boils down to one thing for me, and it's really finding something that you really, really believe in. Speaking for myself and what I've seen with other companies is that when you find something you really care about, and even I'll give example with this book, the definition of something you really care about is that you're not kind of discouraged by the possibility of failure, right? Because you believe in it. There's something I heard from Elon Musk and it always stuck with me, is that he said some things are just so important that is worth doing, right? Is worth trying. Like I have to give it a shot, even if the odds are against me, because that's ultimately what's going to motivate you in the tough times, and that's what's going to keep you going. If you don't have that, everything is tough, right? Because it's like, if you ever done a job that you're not excited about, the smallest thing is a challenge. And then if you've done a job that you really believe in and it means something to you, you'll go the extra mile. You'll stay after hours. You'll find a way to get things done, even when your skills and your experience are not really positioning you well to succeed. You still find a way. So how do you get that passion? I think it comes down to a lot of what we're saying, seeding yourself, exposing yourself to things that by the time you get to the other side of this, you understand what's happening and you find something that you really think I can make a difference in this. I mean, to the point about Elon Musk, I mean, they asked him about Tesla, and he said, I didn't think it was going to succeed, right? So, I mean, he even did it knowing that it's a huge challenge and it may not never will, succeed, but nevertheless, he felt it was important enough to kind of advance it enough. And you kind of almost feel like that you have to do it or you can't kind of live with yourself, right? So I think spending the time to get that first, it makes action and motivation a lot easier than the other. I say conversely, if you're just looking for a financial opportunity, you don't have that flame, and you will burn out quickly, because anything successful will make money. So that shouldn't be the first priority. Obviously, you want to look for something that has a big market where it can be sustainable, but at the same time, it's the core drivers is more inward, more kind of personal than just financial success.
Wow. Work on something that even the probability of failure is not discouraging enough. Wow.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. That's very deep. Amir, thank you very much. It has been an honor, and you are so wise, and I highly recommend everyone who's listening to us to check out your books, Startup Arabia, and you are so kind to mention that it is for free at startuparabia.com, and your second book, Ecosystem Arabia, which is now available on Amazon. I believe they are jam-packed with wisdom about entrepreneurship and how to succeed in that very exciting journey. So thank you very much, Amir, for your time, and I hope to meet you soon in Cairo.
My pleasure, and thank you, everyone, and please be safe, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.